Amen. Well, guys, go ahead and take a seat. This morning, we have the privilege of hearing from a dear friend of New Community Church, MegWard. She is founder of JOYKC. It's a ministry that reaches teens and adults with disabilities. We got to hear from her last year, and it was fantastic, so much so that it was a no-brainer to have her back. So if you guys would give a warm Numa welcome to MegWard.
Thanks. Ooh. Good morning, Numa. How's everybody doing? Good, love it. Well, thank you so much for having me today. We have a lot of affection in our heart for your community at JOYKC, and we're just really thankful for our continued partnership with you all. I'm excited to share today. I do feel like Jesus has given me a few things to share. And honestly, I really speak to you from a place of process. These are things that I'm very much still talking to the Lord about. And so it's really my hope and my prayer that he would just come in presence this morning, that he would come in tenderness, and that he would just meet all of our hearts just with fresh hope, because that's what he does, and that's who he is. In this season of my life, the truest thing that I know is that Jesus is my friend, which is so simple. We grow up, a lot of us, singing songs about it. But the weightiness of that reality has wrecked me in this season. I'm so struck in times of worship when I read stories in the Bible, when I hear people and their stories of how they're experiencing Jesus, I'm so struck, because I'm that is my friend that people are experiencing. That is my friend that songs are being sung about. That is my friend who I know so well. That's such an intimate, personal thing. That is my friend, Jesus. This is our friend, Jesus, the one who is so safe, the one who is closer than skin, the one who loves our honesty, the one who lets us cry, the one who listens, who speaks to our hearts in encouragement and joy, the one who doesn't see our neediness as the kind of burden that we often perceive it to be. This is our friend, Jesus, who mutually wants to be known, who mutually wants to have a place and to share his heart. This is our friend, Jesus. And I'm so struck in this season that there are certain places that only him and I go together, right? He is the one who makes his forever home in our hearts, and he's the one that walks with us in the deepest places of pain, who makes intercession for our healing. He's the one that ascends with us on mountaintops and watches together and looks out on all of the conquered places of our journey. These are places and moments that I have to explain or tell other people about, but he is the first responder, right, to my emotional process. It's that kind of intimacy that we get to know him in all of life. I'm so overwhelmed by that in this season. I know you guys are in a series of following Jesus, which is so fun. And Joe really asked me to highlight the Great Commission, which we know in the Bible, which is Jesus's kind of last message that he gives his disciples before he ascends to heaven. And there's so much meat within the Great Commission, right? There's so much identity that Jesus unpacks, so much vision for how we are to live. But I really want to start and land and finish in Matthew 28:20. And I want us all to just kind of pause and receive this verse just in light of what I just shared, that this is our friend Jesus speaking to us. This is his voice. This is the perspective that he is speaking as a friend. In it, he says, "And never forget that I am with you every day. I am with you every day, even to the completion of this age." Jesus drew close to his disciples in that moment and revealed his identity as Emmanuel, God with us. He is with us. And to me, the Great Commission is this invitation into friendship with Jesus and into all of life, right? As we love people and as we love the world and as we love him, it's taking his hand that he offers and walking with him in wonder and awareness of all that he's doing, of all that he's saying, of all that he might be inviting us into. And we know the truth, right? We know John 10, that we are sheep who are made to hear and recognize the voice of our shepherd, that this is part of our inheritance as children of the Lord. And I think friendship is walking in awareness and recognizing the voice of the one who guides us, recognizing when he speaks. And I think the reality that I keep coming back to in this season is that we don't always know where he leads us, right? But we know him. We know him, the constant one, the one who promises in a covenant kind of way to be with us until the completion of this age. We don't always know what he's going to say or what he's going to invite us into, but we know him. Graham Cook has a really awesome message. I think I listened to it when I was 15, and it's really stuck with me, but there's a quote in there that he says, "There is no security in what God is doing. There's only security in who he is." And that's because God calls us and invites us into the impossible and the outrageous and the places that we could never go without him. And the only security in that place, like Graham describes, is that the lion pads at our side. We don't always know where he's going to lead us, but we know him. And we know who we are to him, right? We know that we have a God who is completely for us, who is delighted by us, who is pleased by our company. And I just keep coming back to it's a love story, right? It's a love story between us and this lover of our soul, the one who made war against sin, the one who conquered death, the one who makes a way for a better covenant, which is this marriage between us and himself, this marriage between himself and a bride who he knew could never be fully faithful in it. This is the terms that he set. This is the way he has chosen to love us. And in this season, I've learned so much about what friendship with the Lord looks like through incredible weakness. This season of my life has been marked by so much delay, so much disappointment and fear. And I like being powerful. I like the sense of being in control. My first glance inward is seldom compassionate. I am very harsh on myself and have a frame that is bent towards performance and perfectionism and impossible standards. And everything in me burns to bring God glory, everything in me. I'm so struck in this season by my weakness and by my inability to do so. I really met Jesus when I was 13, and I keep coming back to something he said when I was 13. He whispered, "Meg, it's not gifts or talents that I'm after, it's you that I want." And we know that, right? We know that that is true. But without gifts, without status, without performance, without power, without accomplishing one thing, that we are enough for God, that nothing changes his affections for us. Mercy is who he is. And he's not frustrated by our humanness, right? We know that he lived on earth. He understands our human frame. He's not frustrated by our moments of lack, by our weakness. And in places of brokenness, he doesn't stiff arm us, right? He doesn't have to muster something within himself to tolerate us, to tolerate our neediness. We just can't outrun him. We can't outrun his grace. Jesus showed me a picture a little while ago where I was sitting crisscross on the ground, clinging to his throne, like out of desperation. I was like clinging to one of the legs. And I like look up expecting to like lock eyes with Jesus, and like he isn't on the throne. And there's like a little moment of panic, right? And I like turn and I like see him sitting on the ground crisscross in like the dirt with me, and he's weeping with me. Like he is a God who is so secure in his lordship that he is not threatened to enter into low places with us. Like this is covenant, right? Like a marriage through the good, the bad, the ugly. Like this is a covenant between us together. This is our friend, Jesus. I don't know if you guys have read Gentle and Lowly before. Highly recommend. I read it all the way through and then started at the beginning, and I'm reading it still by Dane Ortland. He has this quote, "The sins of those who belong to God open the floodgates of his heart of compassion for us. The dam breaks. It is not our loveliness that wins his love. It is our unloveliness." Jesus came for the weak. We know that he came for the poor, the outcast, the broken, the ones so far gone by religious standards. And Jesus' life and experiences on earth give us permission to feel the full scope of human emotion, right? We know that he was a man well acquainted with grief. And I continue to find in this season of my life that he is so much more kind, so much more tender than I even know him to be. He is Emmanuel, God with us, God with me in my places of weakness. And I keep like remembering the story of the widow who had 2 coins, right? That felt like nothing in light of all of the extravagant gifts that were given. And that feels like me in the season of my life where it's like, all I have is these 2 coins, and it doesn't feel like anything in light of everything that burns within me to give him. It feels like nothing, and yet that really is pleasing. That really is enough. That small yes, that small sacrifice, that small glance toward heaven, like that's all that he wants, and it's enough. This is enough for God. That he really isn't lying when he says that in our weakness, he is made strong. In our weakness, he is glorified. He isn't lying when he says that. That he really does delight in this dance of dependency with us when all of our weight, all of our need is on him. That this is the place that he chooses to live and that he wants to be a part of. I've been studying a lot about Abraham in this season of my life. Quite a guy. Abraham, who is considered God's friend, our father and example of faith. And we know that God promised to give Abraham a big family, right? Despite barrenness, despite age. God promised to give Abraham a big family. And we know that Abraham waited for 25 years for the fulfillment of Isaac, for the fulfillment of that promise. He waited 25 years. A man who the Bible describes was as good as dead, was waiting in expectation and hope for the fulfillment of this promise. And we know that Abraham did so many things right. We know that he left his country to follow God without knowing where he was going. We know that he was a warrior, right, who overtook kings to rescue Lot, who had been kidnapped. We know that he was a man of wealth and resource and did not take the promised land by force, although he may have had the power to do it. We know that he was a man of incredible faith, that even when the fulfillment of that promise happened through Isaac, that Abraham withheld nothing before God, that he was willing to sacrifice Isaac because it was logical to him that the promises that God gives do not come back void. It was so logical for him to offer up everything that he had been given. Romans 4:18 says, against all odds, even when it looked hopeless, even when it seemed unlikely, Abraham believed the promise of God and expected God to fulfill it. We know that Abraham was a man who waited and walked in hope because the promises that God gives do not come back void. That is how he operated in his life. But we also know that Abraham, had shortcomings, right? We know that he lived in a ton of fear. He lived in a ton of self-protection. We know that on 2 different accounts, he lied about his marital status because he was afraid for his life. We know that he took matters into his own hands and slept with a servant to bring about God's promise of a big family on his own terms. But what I keep coming back to is like all of those heroes that we read about in Hebrews 11, all of those heroes of faith, they're not remembered for their shortcomings. That's not how God saw them or describes them. And that's not a new message, right? Like, especially for those of us that have grown up in church, but it's so easy for me to read these stories at times and to not apply them to my own life. Because the reality is that Abraham was God's friend, and Abraham totally failed, but that's not how God saw him. And that's the reality of my life, that I am God's friend, and I totally fail, but that's not how God sees me. Jesus showed me this picture a couple of months ago of this pillar, this stone pillar, and I was the pillar represented in this picture. And all of these assaults were against the pillar. I saw people hurling stuff at it. People were trying to take it down. Big stones are being thrown against it. And as I was watching, I just the Lord released this stubborn refusal in my heart as I was watching this pillar, because I just refused to give up, right? In this season of my life that has felt so very weak, where I've never felt so much temptation to give up and to give in. There was this refusal, this stubborn refusal as I was watching that I will not be defeated. I will not be defeated. Even if victory doesn't look like the way I want it to, I am not going to give up and to give in. And it's no wonder that this position, this stance enrages deep as hell, because I will stand. And I just wonder if this is where we find Abraham too at different times in his life. Abraham waited for 25 freaking years for the promise of God to be fulfilled. I'm sure all of his friends had kids, and maybe those kids even had kids, as Abraham just watched as he got older and older and older, as Sarah's barrenness wasn't going anywhere. I'm sure that there were moments of very deep doubt and very deep question. But Abraham did not give up, right? He refused to give up or to give in. He refused. And I think that's my prayer for myself. That is my prayer for the bride in this hour, that we would do nothing less than to stand firm exactly where God has put our feet. Despite attacks, that is exactly the position that we would be in, like Abraham, where we would wait in hope and stubborn refusal, that we would not give up. And the cross is endurance, right? As much as I wish that wasn't true at times, the cross is endurance. And despite moments where God may appear disengaged or cruel, we know who he is, right? He is the constant one. He is Emmanuel. He is the friend who promises to be with us in all of life. We know who he is. We know who we are to him. We know, 1 John, that he is light and that darkness cannot exist within him. It contradicts itself. It cannot exist in him. We know who he is. We don't always know where he's going to invite us to walk into, but we know him. We know who he is. That is our only security, friends. It's like knowing who he is. It's our only security. Hebrews 6:18 says, "And now we have run into his heart to hide ourselves in his faithfulness. This is where we find his strength and comfort, for he empowers us to seize what has already been established ahead of time, an unshakable hope." Hope is alive, right? Hope is alive. Hope is alive. Hope is alive. And it is a person named Jesus. And all we have to do is come. That's all he asks, is for us to come. He does not despise our weakness or our brokenness. Like, all he wants is to be invited. It's the only prerequisite, right, is to come. So Jesus, we just thank you for your friendship with us. We thank you that you are so incredibly patient. You are kinder than we even know you to be. And I just thank you, Jesus, that you do not see our shortcomings in the way that we often do. And that in our weakness, it's an invitation for you to be strong, for you to be known, for you to glorify yourself. And that you're so pleased by that, that this was your design for us to be needed by you, this dance of dependency that you do not despise, that this is the term that you have set for your love. And so, God, we just give you our love right back. Even when it feels small, even when it feels not enough, even when it feels like those 2 widow coins, in light of all that we want to give you, that really is enough, Jesus. That you are a God who is so very pleased and so very proud. And so we just thank you and acknowledge that this morning, that you are our dearest friend. You are Emmanuel, God with us in our weakness. And so, yeah, Jesus, I just pray that you would continue to show all of us how to walk in this kind of friendship that is in awe and in wonder and aware of what you're doing and what you're saying, because we want you. We want to know you. Bless Numa, Jesus. Amen.
Awesome. Can we give her a round of applause? Thanks so much, Brandon.
Yeah.
That was powerful. Kind of a weird God thing. So much of what she was speaking, I think I felt like she was really speaking to me in a number of ways. But also, she didn't know this. Last week, we talked about the widow's offering in community groups. She didn't know that. And I handed her the Bible this morning just to read as we were doing a sound check, and it was that chapter randomly. So I don't know, there might be something that God has specifically for you or for us, just that whatever you have is enough. Whatever you have to offer God is enough. I think that's for all of us this morning. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us this morning. If you want to learn more about JOYKC and the things that they're doing, they're going to be out at the table back there. They do an awesome weekly program, and they're always looking for people that want to help with people with disabilities. They also have that run coming up next week, so if you're somewhat athletic and you want to support in that way, I think it's a 5K walk or run.
1 mile walk, 1 mile run, 5K.
Yeah. Perfect. And we'll have ice cream there. So if that entices you, would love to see you guys there. All right, guys, that's it for now. Feel free to grab bagels, coffee on your way out, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.